So I'll start. This class will be recorded. The audio, video, and chat will be archived, unedited, on Rodef Shalom's Facebook page. If you do not wish to be recorded, just mute your microphone, turn off your video, and refrain from participating in the chat. You will still be able to see and hear the class. We will now start the recording.
Okay. So I am going to mute everybody, and presenters, please unmute as needed.
My name is Reid.
We can't hear you, Reid.
There we go. My name is Reid Willis, and I will be the moderator for this afternoon's Day of Learning session titled Election Debriefing. Our tech angel is Ned Hanover. I don't think anyone realized what an understated title Election Debriefing would turn out to be. The 2020 election had the greatest voter turnout by absolute numbers in US history and the highest by percent of eligible voters since 1900, when women were not allowed to vote and most Blacks were disenfranchised. In Pennsylvania, 6.9 million people, or 70.8% of our state's voting population, voted in 2020 as compared to 6.1 million people, or 63.6% of the voting age population in 2016. In October, voter registration topped 9 million for the first time. This was not an accident. It happened in large part due to grassroots efforts from ordinary citizens who did extraordinary things. It is my privilege to introduce three of these citizens: Adam Bonin, Michelle Brancheau-Fogg, and Stephanie Miller. Adam is an election attorney who represents clients in campaign finance, election law, voter protection, lobbying, compliance, just to name a few. Adam will be giving a PowerPoint presentation, after which time we will open the Zoom session for questions. Please enter your questions using the chat box. Following Adam's presentation, Michelle and Stephanie will talk about their role in getting out the vote. I will introduce them both in mid-session. Adam, we have your complete attention.
Oh boy. First of all, it is a thrill to be able to speak with my fellow congregants today. As I was saying before we got started, I thought I'd be talking to the synagogue under much different circumstances today. Tonight was supposed to be the start of my younger daughter's bat mitzvah weekend. She chose to postpone things because of COVID, which makes today a bit of a weird day because she was totally ready, but here we are. By way of background, yeah, I am an election law attorney, and among other things pertaining to this election, I had and have two significant roles. Number one, on behalf of the Biden campaign and the Pennsylvania Democratic Party, I served as the lead voter protection counsel for Philadelphia. And number two is that on behalf of a variety of interests, I've served as local counsel to the team at Perkins Coie, Mark Elias and the Democracy Docket folks, if you're on Twitter, with regards to all sorts of pre, during, and post-election litigation. Everything I'm going to talk about today is my own perspective only. Do not attribute anything I say to anyone else, certainly not to any of my clients, and I don't even know if I believe half of what I'm saying at this point because I'm so exhausted. What I want to do, and now I am going to share my screen and go over to a slideshow, is go over everything that's actually happened in the past year or so in election law, just so you can understand everything that got us to this point. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will look at them thereafter, or however else we want to address questions. But I'm going to try to get through this because hopefully I've anticipated most of what's happening. So by way of overview, Here we go. We're going to talk about Act 77, the early days of COVID, Act 12 and the primary, what I'll call the summer of love, because I couldn't think of anything else to call it when in fact it was full of litigation, pre-election hijinks, post-election hijinks, post-election hijinks, where we are and where we still have yet to go. It all starts with Act 77 of 2019, which was a three-way compromise signed into law on Halloween of last year. Everyone got something out of it. The governor got $90 million in bond funding for the new voting machines that he had ordered early in the year for all the counties to have, which meant that every county would have some form of paper ballot backup on their machines, whether it was true and full paper ballots as existed in some counties, or as in Philadelphia, where you had the machines that printed out a paper receipt and stored it of each vote. For the legislative Democrats, they got no excuse mail-in voting for the first time. You did not have to be absent to vote absentee. A longer window for voter registration before each election, from 30 days pre-election to 15 days pre-election, and allowances for early in-person voting as well. The Republican Party got one big thing out of it: the elimination of straight ticket voting, which they had long sought here as they had in other states. That is basically, the single button to press or box to click off to vote for every Democrat or every Republican on the ticket. They believe that that would help them electorally. Spoiler alert, it did. And then came COVID. So on March 12th or so, the entire world shut down and we all said goodbye to our offices. What most people don't remember at this point is that very next Tuesday, there was a special election in Pennsylvania, and in particular in Bucks County that I was involved. It was for a legislative seat that had become vacant. We had received an order from the Court of Common Pleas the night before, and it's important, like these details, like if I don't remember them now, I'm never going to remember them, saying that voters who were self-isolating because of COVID could cast emergency absentee ballots in the same way that a hospitalized voter could. It just meant, and for those of you who know Bucks County, you'll understand the distances we're talking about here. Getting a voter in Bensalem to sign an application, schlepping it up to Doylestown so that a ballot could be issued, bringing that ballot back from Doylestown to Bensalem to be voted, and then return from Bensalem to Doylestown by 8 o'clock that night for it to be counted. Add to that COVID, which meant that with these applications and with these ballots, our volunteers basically had to put things into sandwich bags, pass them through mail slots so that people would feel comfortable voting them. This was just a sign of what was to come. 10 days later, the legislature, in a remarkable act of bipartisanship and common sense, never to be repeated, agreed on Act 12 of 2020, which did a few things. It moved the primary back by 5 weeks to give us time to deal with COVID and to adjust for it. It allowed for cities and counties to consolidate polling places and election boards for the primary, given how many fewer were going to be available, because places like nursing homes and apartment buildings weren't going to want to be hosting elections at that point, as you remember. It made clear that counties could not start processing ballots until Election Day. Flag this for later. It said that if you showed up to register to vote at a county voting office, they were supposed to process it on the spot. Flag that for later. It eliminated most challenges during the review of ballots and ballot envelopes, especially flag this for later. And it set up a procedure that if you had received a mail-in envelope and hadn't voted it by Election Day, you could still walk it into your polling place where it could be voided by the judge of elections, allowing you to vote on a machine. This sets everything up for the primary. What happens during the primary? A whole lot of people had problems processing things, especially in this area. Because people had until 2 weeks before the election to register to vote, and because people had until 7 days before the primary to apply for a mail-in ballot, there was an absolute processing crunch. What you'll see here is a declaration from Delaware County as to what was happening. That especially when it came to taking absentee ballot applications that were submitted on paper, counties just could not keep up with the volume of stuff that came in the last few days. And as you can see in Delaware County, they were putting into the mail thousands of ballots up until the day before Election Day, and even had 400 to 500 left on Election Day itself that they still hadn't gotten around to sending yet. The governor issued emergency relief for 6 counties based on those which were under emergency orders because of the post-George Floyd protests, allowing those counties and only those counties to have a 3-day extension, a 7-day extension of the ballot receipt window. But things were slowed down then. They were slowed down in terms of counting the vote here in Philadelphia for a variety of paperwork reasons. It was a mess. Everyone knew things needed to be fixed. Were they fixed? Not by the legislature. So during the summer, you had a lot of lawsuits that got going, some of which I was involved in. There was litigation seeking an extension of the mail ballot deadline for the general election and seeking, just because of COVID, the allowance of third-party ballot delivery assistance. The idea that if you didn't feel comfortable leaving your house, you could give your ballot to a friend to deliver to the County Board of Elections. It also sought, and the governor was able to provide, prepaid ballot mail. Given COVID, no one had to go and find stamps to return their ballots. There were also dueling lawsuits, one raised by the Trump campaign and in federal court, and a responsive one from the Pennsylvania Democratic Party in state court, litigating over certain guidance that the Department of State had been issuing with regards to this election. Should naked ballots be counted? The ones in which the voter did not put the ballot inside the envelope, inside the other envelope. Hopefully at this point, you still remember the millions of dollars of advertising on this. And that, in fact, they had, well, we'll get to that in a second. Questions as to whether counties had to match signatures on mail-in ballot envelopes to those on the file. Questions as to whether counties had to allow people to go into polling places who didn't live in that county to observe what was going on. The big game changer in a lot of this was a letter that the General Counsel for the Postal Service sent to our Department of State on July 29th. And as you can see, what it said was that given our mail deadlines and given the deterioration of their delivery standards because of COVID and other reasons, they believe that there was a significant risk that mails could be legally requested in time and not returned in time. And they wanted to let us know that. Based on that, and based on a day-long hearing in Harrisburg on August 31st, with quite a bit of plexiglass involved, and based on the governor's urging, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed to, as you know, a 3-day mail ballot receipt extension, including for those ballots which did not contain a postcard at all, but for either didn't contain a postmark or for which the postmarks were illegible, they were going to be deemed legal. A few weeks later, the state Supreme Court also ruled that drop boxes were legal, that this was reasonable under the law for counties to allow, but that they could not allow the receipt of naked ballots, that state law was sufficiently clear that when it says you shall use the security envelope, that shall means shall, and you must do that. But also that that out-of-county poll watchers were not allowed. This was basically Republicans wanting to send people from the suburbs into Philadelphia because, as you know well by this point, bad things happen in Philadelphia. The federal court in which the Trump campaign had sued deferred to all of these state law findings, and further finding that for all of their hue and cry, the Trump campaign had presented no evidence of voter fraud going on because of any of these things. So now we get to October and things really get crazy in October. The Republicans appeal up this extension of the mail ballot deadline, saying that under Article 2 of the US Constitution, the Elections Clause, only the state legislature gets to decide how to run a presidential election. The US Supreme Court negated that authority through its ruling. The court deadlocked 4-4 on this and refused before the election to stay that deadline. Then all the lawsuits keep happening. I could have spent 10 pages just on this. As you may recall from what I said before, the Department of State and the courts had determined that you could have satellite voting centers where someone could show up, register to vote, request a ballot, receive the ballot, and vote the ballot in one trip. Republicans also wanted to send watchers into those facilities. Here in Philadelphia and in Allegheny County, the county said, no, these are just offices of the Board of Elections. They're not polling places. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're not going to let extra people in there. Republicans sued over that and lost. There was the Bognet suit filed in federal court, which was also challenging the mail extension deadline purely from a federal constitutional perspective. This case was heard in Johnstown. Why? Because it also ended up losing, but it lost in a really interesting way, which will come up in about a slide or two. There was the CTCL case. As you may have noticed, there's a foundation called the Center for Technology in Civic Life out there, which was quite generous in funding election administration here in Philadelphia, across the Commonwealth and across the country. They literally doubled the city's election budget for this year because they, thanks to a grant from Mark Zuckerberg and others, wanted to enable faster ballot processing, more satellite voting centers, more outreach on ways to vote. Some Republicans didn't like this. They thought it was somehow illegal for governments to accept private money for this when, they accept private money for other things all the time. Think about, Friends of the Free Library and things like that. That lawsuit went nowhere. In the General Assembly, there was a lot of debate over this pre-canvassing issue as to, can't we come up with some way for the counties to start processing ballots sooner? They had asked for 21 days. The counties, on a bipartisan basis, asked for 21 days of pre-canvassing. Republicans were willing to give them 3 days of pre-canvassing, but only if the state would relent and require signature matching, outlaw drop boxes, and all other bad things. It went to brinksmanship. Democrats didn't cave. Republicans got nothing. No one got pre-canvassing. No pre-canvassing meant all of the post-election controversies that we now have been hearing about of the, oh my God, why have all these ballots been dumped so late? Get to that in a second. The final pre-election thing that I want to flag briefly is DOS guidance issues. Because among other things, the Department of State told all of the counties, as you're receiving these mail-in ballots, you may notice problems with them, that the voter forgot to sign them, or that based on holding them up to the light or just feeling them, you could tell the voter sent in a naked ballot. It's too thin. There's no envelope inside of that. And the Department of State told all of the counties, you can call the voters and tell them that they screwed up and give them a chance to fix this. Only a few counties, only Democratic controlled counties decided to do so. Republican counties did not. Flag that for a second. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court also entered a ruling, because remember, back in September, they said you don't have to match signatures to what's on file. They went further at the request of the Department of State and said, actually, no one can match signatures to what's on file. Going through the legislative history and determining that the legislature knew how to require signature matching when they wanted to do so. When you go to a polling place and you sign into a book, the statute says you need to match the two, and if it looks wrong, you have to somehow otherwise prove that you're yourself. They didn't do that here. And so the state Supreme Court, in a unanimous ruling, said, hey, it looks like the legislature wanted to get rid of all of these challenges once it was time to start counting the votes. This becomes a very big deal very quickly as the next slide. So Election Day happens, and a whole lot of things happen on Election Day, and I just want to focus on one of them, and that's what you see in this picture. which is that in Philadelphia and a number of other counties, Republicans were really upset at their vantage point on all the vote counting. That what had happened in Philadelphia, for example, is they put up what I would call, the Mummers Street barriers, the things that they put up on Broad Street, when the parade goes through, and generally kept people away from all of the tables where the processing was happening. The statute said you're allowed to have an observer in the room, and that's literally what they did. Republicans thought that they had a right to basically roam the tables and roam the room freely to look at and stare over the shoulders of everything that was going on. They sued on this on election day and lost. Sorry about that. They sued on that on election day and lost, but they kept the issue alive because they really, because they believed that they had a right to look closer. And in fact, 2 days after, they immediately appealed that up to the state Commonwealth Court. We had a hearing on that Wednesday night. Judge Fasano Cannon of the Commonwealth Court had us on the phone for an hour-long discussion as to when we would brief this thing. The Philadelphia Board of Elections said they should brief it by by 9 in the morning. Give us 12 hours to respond. The Republicans said, no, everyone should file their briefs by 9 a.m. the next morning. The court said, no, everyone should file their briefs by 8 a.m. the next morning. And so we did. And by 9:30 that morning, she had entered an order saying, yes, Republicans can freely roam the room and look at whatever they want. Republicans come rushing into the room, brandishing this order. Corey Lewandowski was there. There was lots of yelling. You may have seen videos of some of this on Twitter. The city immediately appeals the order. The appeal was filed by about 11:30 in the morning, at which point that order was stayed. All the processing stopped for a few hours because no one was quite sure what to do. Later that day, processing resumes. So that's thing one post-election. Things two is that notice and cure issue that we talked about. When I said that, some counties did let people fix and some people didn't, this became part of the big Rudy suit that you heard a lot about, that they said that it violated equal protection, that only Democratic counties let people fix their ballots, but Republican parties did not. Even though, of course, the Republicans thought that, the Republican counties chose not to do that. They also sued over the Canvass Observer issues, saying that any ballot that we couldn't watch through the whole way is a ballot that should be presumed fraudulent and thrown out. As you know, parts of that case got voluntarily dismissed by the Republicans. Other things went on. There was the hearing in Williamsport, which you may have listened to on the phone or in clips, in which Mayor Giuliani rambled about quite a lot of things, except really the things that were at issue in that case, which the judge ended up dismissing right after the state Supreme Court said, no, you have a right to be in the room for the processing. That's all you had the right to do. That lawsuit then got appealed up to the Third Circuit, which also dismissed it. They have yet to appeal that to the Supreme Court, even though it's now 6 days later, and you would have expected that to happen. In other news, Congressman Mike Kelly from the Erie area and a bunch of conservatives decided after the election to sue over Act 77 itself. That 13 months after it had been enacted, they suddenly discovered their belief that it violated the state constitution to extend mail-in ballots that way, and they believed that the only solution was to throw out every mail-in ballot that had been cast in the Commonwealth. As you could imagine, and as you might have hoped, the state Supreme Court threw out that lawsuit, basically saying it's too late. You can't tell people after an election that they couldn't vote in the way that we told them that they were allowed to vote. That case has been appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's also expected to go nowhere, but it's there. Mail ballot errors. This is something that's a little bit more meaningful, which actually happened, and let fewer people know about this one. So when you fill out a mail ballot, there are certain things you need to do on the envelope, according to the instructions. Well, according to the form itself. You know, you're supposed to print your name, you're supposed to print your address, you're supposed to print the date on which you voted that envelope. You're also supposed to sign the envelope. Some voters screwed parts of that up. Those who didn't sign their names, that ballot got tossed, because without any signature at all, you don't know who voted a ballot. But as to those voters who failed to print their address or print their name when they were on the pre-printed label on the outside of the envelope, some counties, including Philadelphia and Allegheny and the suburban counties here, said, that's a trivial error. We want to count those ballots. Republicans objected to those. This case also made its way up to the Supreme Court, our state Supreme Court, which decided, I don't know, 2 weeks ago now, that if you didn't print the address, that was okay. If you didn't print your name, that was okay. If you didn't print the date, however, you had 3 justices of the 7 justices on the court. You had 3 justices saying that's not a problem at all. You had 3 justices saying it is a problem because the statute says you shall provide the date, and we feel forced to throw these ballots out. And you have 1 justice in the middle, David Wecht, a Democrat from Pittsburgh, who ruled that, you know what, they're right. The statute says shall provide the date. It means you have to provide the date. But I can't in good conscience enforce that as to this election because it didn't say it on the ballot envelope. Did you remember to put the date down? And so I'm not going to disenfranchise people for that reason. Now, why does this matter? There's a state Senate race out in Allegheny and Westmoreland counties between the Democratic incumbent Jim Brewster and the Republican challenger Nicole Ziccarelli. At the time of this ruling, Ziccarelli was up by 4 votes out of 130,000 cast. There were 94 votes that fell into that category of missing date, or rather a net 94 gain for Brewster in Allegheny County as a result of that missing date that now are being counted, and now Jim Brewster gets to remain a state senator. In addition, the mail extension deadline issue is still pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. They still haven't ruled on it yet, and it's unclear what's going to happen there, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because thanks to all of the messaging that the Democratic Party did, that independent groups did, that all of you did through Facebook and otherwise talking to each other, there were fewer than 10,000 ballots received across the state within that 3-day extension window. People didn't wait to cast those ballots. They didn't vote naked ballots in the way that people had feared. Like, people really listened to the instructions that were out there. And that puts us to where we are right now. Those cases are still outstanding. In terms of dates, these are the ones to focus on. December 8th is what's called the safe harbor deadline under federal law. Any state that has determined its electors by that date is presumed valid in Congress. On December 14th, the electors meet in the 50 state capitals and DC to cast their votes for president. And on January 6th, those votes are read in Congress. That's when it really becomes official. Can people object to that? Yeah, and there's going to be some Republican talk of that. It's going to go nowhere. On January 20th, 2021, in front of far fewer people than this, I imagine, Joe Biden will become the next president of the United States. Well, I kind of talked for a while and I see that there's a lot of questions here. I don't know, Reid, if you want me to look at these now or if you want the other presenters to go first. I'm happy to do whatever you want.
I think it's a good time to start looking at questions. And
okay.
I know you've already touched upon this point, but I'll ask the question anyway. The question is, why did the Republicans put up such a fight for the 3 additional days beyond November 3rd? And the second, the follow-up, which I think you've already addressed, is with the new Supreme Court, if that had been in place, would it have made a difference in Pennsylvania?
I mean, in answer to the second question, it would not have made a difference as to the results, but it certainly could have made a difference as to the law. It is certainly possible that Justice Coney Barrett could have voted with the 4 Republicans in opposition to the extension of the deadline, and denied the 3 days. I mean, it really is an important constitutional issue which is unresolved, which is as to the role of state Supreme Courts in enforcing state constitutions on presidential elections. We've had this constitution for almost 250 years now. We still haven't quite gotten to resolving that issue yet. Why do Republicans care about this so much? I want to be measured in what I am saying here, because we are not, the congregation is a nonprofit, and I want to try to be nonpartisan here. But I certainly can say, as a general matter, that Republicans believe in more restrictions on voting. There was some talk that maybe it could lead to fraud, that if you had a window for receiving ballots after Election Day, that somehow people could manufacture the ballots that they needed, find a magical way to put it through the mail so that they wouldn't be postmarked and so that extra ballots could be counted. So they were always couched in these anti-fraud arguments.
The next question is, didn't the Republicans argue that one or both of those 2 election acts that you showed violated the PA Constitution? If the winning argument, it was a technicality that nobody had objected within 180 days, the question is, if the act's unconstitutional, how can that limit trump the unconstitutionality argument?
This gets really complicated. Because the court made clear in its ruling in the Kelly case that it was uncomfortable with that 180-day limit, and based on rulings that it had made over the summer, it saw that more as a limit on the Supreme Court's exclusive jurisdiction to govern these things. The challenges that were raised before in terms of the mail extension deadline were all as applied challenges that sort of, this is constitutional, but for COVID and because of USPS delays, we need to extend it. We need to look at this. It is true the Kelly challenge is the only just straight up facial unconstitutional challenge. And I think the court is right to question the General Assembly's ability to insulate an act from constitutional scrutiny that way. And certainly, at least the Republicans in dissent invited them to keep up the challenge, which raises, I want to be fair here, interesting but kind of stupid issues as to whether the General Assembly can extend mail-in balloting by calling it something other than absentee balloting.
There's a follow-up. If Act 77 had been challenged in a timely basis, do you think it would have been held constitutional in accordance with the Pennsylvania Constitution?
Under that challenge, no. I do think that state constitutional provision, which allowed for absentee ballots, did not restrict other forms of mail balloting by non-absent voters. It is interesting and something that we talked about a lot, which is that because Act 77 had a non-severability clause, and if you find any of this unconstitutional, then it all must fall, as to whether basically widespread mail balloting would have been required this year, regardless of Act 77 because of COVID. That sort of the state constitutional guarantees of free and equal elections meant that citizens needed to have the right to vote by mail, even if the General Assembly had never granted it at all.
I have one more question, and then we're going to switch to our other speakers. Is there one source for all the Republican objections? In other words, are the voter suppression tactics centrally instigated, do you think?
That's a good question. And the answer is not really. these suits were coming from different places, from different funding. Certainly, I mean, between Republican leadership in the General Assembly, the Trump campaign, which was not always working in alignment with them, and independent conservative groups such as those challenging the machine funding issues. There is a vast right-wing conspiracy out there, but that doesn't mean that all of the tentacles are always talking to each other.
All right, very good. Thank you so much, Adam.
No problem.
You're going to be helping us out in this next group, but the focus is going to be on our next speakers. I'm pleased to introduce Michelle Brancheau-Fogg and Stephanie Miller. Michelle is Chief of Staff at Bentley Systems, specializing in building, growing, and transforming businesses. As such, Michelle was eminently qualified to lead a team for the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, RACPA. She is also co-leader with Stephanie of Rodef Shalom's Voter and Advocacy Task Force. Stephanie is a professional organizer who helps individuals simplify their lives. She teaches clients how to understand what truly matters. Stephanie and Michelle ask that this session be free-flowing. As such, they are encouraging questions at any time. Again, use the chat box. Stephanie, Michelle, I will start off the discussion with your efforts toward getting out the vote, and I will kick-start the discussion with an opening question. And my opening question is, what fears, hopes, expectations did you have prior to the election? And the follow-up is, and what surprised you most after the election?
Who would you like to go first?
Well, since you started talking, why don't you go first, Michelle?
Okay. So I think before the election, and I'm sure that this is true of everybody or many people on this call, my fears were wide-ranging and sort of ebbed and flowed by the day, and everything from the disenfranchisement of voters to low voter participation to some of the more nefarious efforts to overturn free and fair election results through the courts. So I think that we all had we being many voters had very deep reservations and concerns based on several years of witnessing political actors pushing the envelope in terms of what is legal and allowable, and the fact that much of what has sustained our democracy wasn't necessarily, it was by habit, right? It wasn't necessarily based in law or in the Constitution. So after seeing that for several years, I was concerned that, the possibility of what could happen during this election was almost unimaginable. So in terms of what surprised me, I think what surprised me on the other side was, again, the fact that democracy was held together by one of our branches of government, that really the judiciary branch stepped up and did their job and called balls and strikes based on the law. And so I've been sort of fortified in my belief in democracy has been somewhat restored based on the fact that third branch of the government did what it was supposed to do and checks and balances held. And I was also, I think, fortified by the fact that much of what has enabled this election to be called in the way that the votes indicated was the fact that there were people all over at the local, regional, state level who stepped up and did their jobs and kept the noise at bay and were true, heroes of our democracy and didn't succumb to outside pressures, and that includes Republicans and Democrats. And so those two things have reinstored my faith somewhat, somewhat in our fragile democracy. Oh, and I think you're muted again.
I am. I did see that. Stephanie,
So
can you follow that act?
yeah, so really the way that this whole thing began is that over the summer I was talking to Michelle and just mentioned how I felt the need to get involved somehow. And she mentioned that she was, running this whole initiative for ROTF, and would I like to be involved? I said yes, because I needed a way to channel all of my nervous energy and to do something positive. So that's kind of how I got involved in all of this. I've never done anything like this before, but I felt compelled to do something. And the thing that really, I guess, was my biggest fear is that all of the messaging kept changing. It started as something in the summer, and I would say every couple of weeks, and then as the election drew closer, it was changing, even more frequently than that. And I was afraid that people just weren't going to be able to cast their votes in the way in which they needed to, given the pandemic, and also, just everything that was going on. It started off with, should you get a mail-in ballot or should you go to vote in person? And then it became clear, okay, everyone should, the message was vote as early as you possibly can. So request a mail-in ballot and send it back. Then the Postal Service debacle, and people wondered, should I put it in the mail? What should I do with it? There are no drop boxes, and will we get drop boxes? And so then the messaging became, once drop boxes were allowed, okay, should we put them in drop boxes, or should we go to a satellite election center? And that was something brand new. I think, Adam can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that Philadelphia or Pennsylvania ever had early satellite election locations. And that was something that I think was so fantastic, because it allowed people who weren't registered to vote to register to vote and to cast their ballot right then and there, all in one place. And so for people who weren't sure what to do, that was a really great option. Once those were closed, then it became, should I, take my mail ballot and put it in a drop box, or is it not going to be counted because the votes that are going to get counted on election day will be the votes that are cast on election day. And since none of the, early voting or mail-in ballots were going to be counted on election day, I know myself, and I believe there were lots of other people that had the same thoughts. Should I hold on to my mail ballot, take it to my polling location, give it in and say, I no longer want to use this. I'm ready to now vote on the machine because I wanted my vote to count and not to wait. that messaging then changed, and we were told, no, absolutely do not do that, because election workers have not been trained on what to do. Poll workers do not know what to do with mail ballots. And so therefore then it would just create mass confusion. And so all of the messaging, I was afraid at the very end of the day that it would all be screwed up and people wouldn't get their votes cast in the way that they had intended. I forgot about the whole naked ballot, thing with the double envelope. And the thing that really surprised me about everything is how, I guess, nice and kind and receptive everyone that I spoke to when I did my phone banking was to asking if they are registered to vote, if they know where to vote, and if they needed help. No one, I assumed that most people would hang up the phone and just couldn't be bothered, but it was the exact opposite. And I found that no matter where I went, walking around in the city, I would just approach people and say, are you registered to vote? And I didn't care, because to me, it was that important that if somebody had a question, if it was just a person working at the grocery store or someone, where I was getting my hair cut, if I could just get one extra person to vote when maybe they hadn't considered voting or they didn't know how to or what to do, then I would have done my job. And so in the end, that was really heartening to see that so many people were really interested in making their voices heard. And it showed, because there was record turnout. So,
Michelle, I'll ask you this question, and I want Stephanie to follow up as well. Can you talk about your efforts to recruit teenagers to make phone calls to get people to vote? I just find that remarkable.
So it started in the summer, and Rabbi Eli asked me to speak to some of the Confirmation Academy students about what we were doing, and so I did, and one particular young man who is now a senior at Penn Charter, really quite a young leader, and reinforces my hope in the future. He was really engaged, and as the group, as we started to brainstorm on the committee, this task force, there was a recognition that the voice of the young could be very impactful and powerful with our congregants. It's one thing to receive a call from your peer asking you if you're registered and how you plan on voting. And it's an entirely different thing when a young person calls and says, I don't have the right to vote yet, but it means so much to me. And will you, essentially do your civic duty on my behalf, right? And that's, that has real resonance with people. And so we thought that hearing from our youth would be a much more powerful motivator than Stephanie or Susan or Ellen or I picking up the phone and calling our congregants. In the end, we did do that. I mean, we did some of that as well, but that was the original thinking behind it, and how the mostly juniors and seniors got involved in the outreach to Rodef Shalom congregants.
Stephanie?
Yeah, and I think that was really something special, because they were basically asking, will you vote on my behalf, because this is my future that's at stake. And that's pretty powerful. but in the end, when a bunch of us ended up making some of the phone calls as well, people were really kind and receptive. And I would say that the majority of the people that we spoke with, or that I spoke with, were really happy to hear from us and said, this is a great thing you're doing. Thank you so much. I already voted. I would say 90% of the people that I spoke with had already voted. And that made me feel like the messaging was heard loud and clear. And whether it came from the teens or it came from, one of us, I think it was impactful regardless.
I want to bring Adam back in this conversation with more of a legal question. What kind of election legislation would you promote in Pennsylvania in view of what you've learned from this election?
I would want to, number one, lock in all of the Department of State guidance as being applicable and mandatory statewide. We shouldn't have 67 counties worth of rules on this stuff, and the Department of State needs to have the authority to issue 67 county binding guidance on things like notice and cure for defective ballots, on the standards to be applied in counting a ballot as to whether the date, etc., is required, as to the legality of drop boxes. That all should be incorporated into the law. We absolutely need to allow the counties to have pre-canvassing time before an election. We shouldn't have this embarrassment that it takes 3 days until they've counted enough of Pennsylvania's vote that we can reasonably predict who the winner was. There is no sound reason to prevent the counties from having a week or more before any election to review the outer envelopes, to and Jonathan Broder is here, witnessed a lot of this, and he knows, like, there's a lot of steps that have to go into counting a ballot which could have happened in advance. You have to look at the envelope, you have to make sure that someone signed it. Okay, then you need to bring it over to a machine to open that envelope. Then you need to extract the inner envelope from that envelope, and you need to open that envelope. Then those envelopes went over to another table where someone pulled out the ballot from the envelope and flattened it. Then a stack of those ballots goes over to the machines to be counted. Like, you could have done everything up until that counting before election day, not hurt the integrity of the process at all, and had results much sooner.
So
Hey, Reid.
another question.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Another question from the audience. Stephanie, which strategies for voter registration and education were most effective this year? And do you think other strategies are needed in future elections?
I mean, so Adam, am I correct in that Philadelphia, or I don't know, maybe Pennsylvania never had satellite election locations before this election?
I mean, that's correct, because remember, before this election, you needed to be absent to vote a mail-in ballot. Otherwise you had to vote on election day between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. So yeah, there wouldn't have been any need for satellite offices for those purposes. You could have still had satellite offices to register to vote or to apply for an absentee ballot if you were going to be absent, but not to receive such a ballot just because you wanted to vote early. It would not have been legal.
Will we have this now moving forward for all of the rest of the elections? Because personally, I think it was tremendous. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I mean, it's a money issue. We couldn't have done this time without, a private foundation doubling our budget. The same could be said in a lot of counties. We can't, I mean, look, the machines are there, but so this is about staffing and rent. I mean, obviously they used for this public schools almost exclusively, which are buildings obviously the city already has, but you still need the staffing and you still need the security and the internet technology to do this. one of the things that I've heard from some city staffers is that if they were to do this again, they would probably do fewer satellite centers, but have them with much larger staffs. That's sort of the choke point at all of these places, is the actual data entry in to confirm a voter's registration and to generate a ballot. And if you could have more of those people at one place, then you could get many more ballots printed faster and have lots of people voting in these places at once. And it'll be interesting. Once we return to normal life and we have greater access to, mass public transportation, I think that's going to be worth looking into.
If I could take the lens out on that one, I mean, I think one of the reasons from a communication standpoint that there was, I mean, there were probably two reasons, right? That the voter turnout was so significant relative to years prior. One, there was just great interest in this election for a lot of obvious reasons, and a lot of general civic engagement from the population. But I think secondly, there was information that was being disseminated rapidly and almost like a fire hose to voters. And while I'm definitely not usually a fan of sort of fire hose of information, I think in this case it worked because it was so complicated. There were, constant changes, and it was a unique year with the pandemic. And I think that these myriad efforts at the grassroots level, all the way, and it wasn't just the grassroots level. It was media. It was the campaigns themselves. So there was this collective effort, national, regional, local effort to educate voters so that we could run a fair and safe election, and people could have their votes counted under very unique circumstances. And so I don't know. I don't know if there's one particular method that works, right? It's for each voter is unique in terms of how they consume information. But so it was hitting, the best marketing plans hit on multiple levers, and hopefully reach their consumer with one of those. And I think in this particular case, the amount of attention and information that was pushed down to voters was tremendous and effective, clearly.
I see we are at the bottom of the hour. It's hard to believe that the time has flown so quickly. I'm compelled to make some closing remarks. Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, has a tribute to the righteous among the nations, dedicated to those who protected their Jewish neighbors during the Holocaust. When one looks at the portraits of these honorees, one sees men and women of all ages. One finds the religious and the atheist, the wealthy industrialist and the peasant farmer and the public figure. They were teachers, doctors, nuns, diplomats, servants, policemen, fishermen, and even a zookeeper and the zookeeper's wife. They all realized that something was wrong. Someone had to do something. They could be that someone, and finally they did it. It is not a choice. It is a way of being. And I want to thank Adam and Stephanie and Michelle for being among the righteous, or as Michelle put it, and I know she wasn't referring to herself, but I do, a hero of democracy. They have inspired us to recognize that there is more work to be done and that we all have the capacity to make a difference. I would also like to thank you participants for joining in and contributing your thoughts to what has been a most riveting discussion. The planning group is eager for your feedback on your experience in Days of Learning. You can access the evaluation form online right after the class ends. The link should be on Rodef Shalom's website and posted in the chat by your tech angel. You can respond to the brief anonymous survey each time you finish a class. The Zoom session, this session will be open for 15 minutes. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves in an unmoderated forum. I will remain online during this period. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm happy to stick around and answer any other questions.
John, I'm wondering if you could just say a few words about your experience on the ground and how it relates to all of this.
Well, and Adam and I bumped into each other a bunch of times during those days there. He was my lifeline. I would just say it was, really an intense experience, even though you're sitting there for 8 hours, shifts and everything, watching all of these things. Because I was there at the time that they ran the motion into the room, and then Adam came in and the PA guy came in and they're moving the bike rack up 10 feet. And the whole thing was just, it was really something. One of the things I private chatted to Adam, the last thing I did when I left the last day, the guy who was the lead lawyer for the Republicans was really a commercial litigator, I think, Adam. I looked him up. I think he represents a lot of oil companies out in the western part of the state. He's not an election lawyer by any means, and really had no idea what was going on. But I said to him, how many hours do you spend trying to figure out how to prevent people's votes from being counted? How do you sleep with yourself? And of course, he did not respond at all, because that's the thing that was stunning. Because basically, my perception was that their entire strategy was to create chaos, to basically gum up the works, to delay things, stop things, with the idea of just throwing anything at the wall that they could. They had no really coherent strategy that I could determine when I was there, because I don't think most of them really understood what the election law was, or even what they were looking at most of the time. Of the 15 poll observers who were there for the Republicans, 2 of them were lawyers, I think. We were all lawyers for the most part on the Democratic side. The rest of them appeared to me, and you tell me, Adam, you may know better, I think they were paid help, that they may have just, a lot of these people were from New Jersey. They looked like they just picked them off the street. They had no clue what was going on. Most of the time, they were just sitting there reading the newspaper or gabbing with each other with no masks. Adam, I think, was the one who sent the email, a few days afterwards, that 3 of these clowns, and I apologize for my language, were tested positive for COVID. Thank goodness I was not on any of the shifts when any of those people were working, but they had their masks down most of the time. If they were talking, they would take their masks off. If they were on the phone, they took their masks off. You try to stay away from them as much as you could, but every time they would go up and try to disrupt what was going on, either harassing the commissioner there, Al Schmidt, or his deputy, Seth Greenstein or Bluestein.
Bluestein.
Yeah. You had to get up there and find out what the heck they were doing and what they were talking about, what they were trying to do. You try to stay away from them, but I think I had more exposure in those 4 days than I've had in 8 months, since COVID began. So, it was really interesting and very stressful, to say the least. I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I don't know how, Adam, you've survived this, and you've done it a lot longer than before, during, and after. Every day it's something different. It was really unbelievable, frankly.
Yeah, those days were crazy and often overwhelming. I remember being really overcome the Friday after Election Day, when they had the dance party outside the convention center after Biden had been declared the winner of Pennsylvania.
Right.
Yeah. And just being completely emotionally overwhelmed at that point, with joy, with exhaustion, with everything. One thing I didn't get around to saying during my remarks, and you're talking about Al and Seth, really occasions this. One of the undertold stories of all of this is just how well the Philadelphia City Commissioner's office performed. Yeah. From the 3 commissioners themselves, Al Schmidt, Lisa Dealey, Omar Sabir, to their deputies, Seth Bluestein, Nick Custodio, Joe Driscoll, to the longtime staffers there. Garrett Dietz, God bless him. these people were working 20, 22, 36-hour days in the early going. I remember, observing fights between the commissioners and their deputies. I'm not going to take a break to nap for 2 hours unless you also take a break. They were pushing themselves to the limit to get the job done. They did their jobs with integrity, just on an even-handed basis. They could not have worked harder, and they fought to count every legal vote that they could amid truly the world's scrutiny. Al Schmidt has gotten a lot of praise out there because he has gone on 60 Minutes and other places to defend the integrity of the vote, but really everyone there deserves praise for the work that they've done, and it's for a city office which doesn't often get it. But they absolutely earned it here.
Their patience was incredible because they treated everybody, even these crazy people, with utmost respect, and they were very responsive. It couldn't have been more professional. I mean, they were really impressive.
Yeah,
Those are the heroes of democracy that I was talking about. I mean, these people, to your point, Adam, that have been under tremendous pressure and scrutiny, that just they have more integrity in their little fingers than the entire Senate has. The entire U.S. Senate has at this point. It's unbelievable. These people, they deserve medals of freedom.
No, and they were getting death threats throughout.
There's still many of them still in all states are getting death threats. It's unbelievable to me.
There's this horrific video that's out there. It was on Fox of Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida, reviewing what was, her version of what was going on in the canvassing room. And then she starts talking about, and there's this deputy with a giant badge, Seth Bluestein.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it was just like, they've gone beyond dog whistles to bullhorns. It was really appalling. But yeah, they weren't intimidated. They kept doing their jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a question. Has your experience brought you to a new place? Stephanie, this question was posed to us. I think it has, it sort of reinforced my observation in my work life and my business life, and that is that success is never just one person acting in isolation doing one grand thing. Success is about many people doing lots of little things right over a sustained period of time. And I think that's what happened in this election, is that a lot of people who care deeply got involved, and it made a difference. And when you're talking about margins of, thousands, tens of thousands, but less than 50,000, you're really all of that sustained work over a period of time by a lot of people is what's required. And so I think it reinforces, I think, what Reid said at the end of his at the end of the session, which was that that to do the right thing, you can start. You are one person, but lots of people doing the right thing creates a movement.
What is the saying from the sages? While we are not obligated to complete the task, nor are we allowed to desist from doing what we can. And look, there are 2 elections next year, at least 2. We're going to be electing judges. We're going to be electing district attorney. If you're out in the suburbs, you're going to be electing local officials. Don't treat voting and elections as a once every 4-year thing. Every year has elections which matter for which we can be empowering and educating voters and getting them to the polls.
Yeah, just as an example, the Commonwealth Court, which is the first level of appeals court in Pennsylvania, they were able to find this judge who was the only one who ruled in favor of the Republican campaign that I can tell pretty much anywhere in the country. And the Commonwealth Court is still, I think, Adam, is overwhelmingly Republican because they were voted in before there was a real push to get people out to come out and vote in these elections. And they found somebody who, did some really strange, issued some really weird rulings.
Judge McCullough was retained in 2019 with 76% of the vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that what was also really inspiring for me is that I think an entirely new generation of voters or people who are getting ready to vote, like my son who's only 15, but he knows what's happening and he volunteered to work at a polling location on election day. I think because he realizes how important this democracy is, and I am inspired by all of the younger people out there and hope that they will now take this challenge and do better maybe than we have in the past and move it forward.
Well, we have a couple minutes. Any final thoughts, Adam?
No,
You're exhausted.
I'm ready to spend time with my family again. This has been I told my wife, because we had just started dating in early 16 and we weren't living together by this point. So she has never really been through a presidential with me before. I told her this thing might go through Thanksgiving. And we've blown way past that. It is what it is. We still have some disputed local elections that we're dealing with. The presidential litigation is waning, but I'm ready for this to be over.
Michelle?
Our democracy is fragile and it's incumbent upon us to protect it. And we are it, right? We're the democracy. So we have to do everything we possibly can to fight to preserve it. It's the great experiment and it deserves preserving.
It reminds me of the Walt, what was it? The cartoonist, can't think of his last name now. Pogo. We have met the enemy and he is us. Stephanie?
Yeah, to me, it's just the collective power of everyone voting together that I think really made the difference. And I am really proud that I was part of that. And I hope that maybe some of you are now inspired to get out the vote next time around.
I think the next major project ought to be get out the vaccine and take it.
Yes.
That's my public service announcement. Thank you all. It is now 1:45, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
So-
you.
So I'm
Bye,
also going to
everybody.
invite everybody, if they want to unmute, we'll have just 15 minutes of social as we're doing for all the events this week.
Oh, I thought that was it, Ned.
No, that's part of the days of learning thing.
Okay.
Where
Well,
we're
gang,
doing that.
I'm gonna drop. Unfortunately, my day job does call, although this is the more inspiring part of my day.
Bye, Michelle.
Take care. Hi, Susan.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.
Susan was instrumental in making all of this happen as well. So she deserves a shout out, more than a shout out, but for this
Yeah,
one.
totally unsung hero. Susan is an unsung hero. Absolutely.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Let me take back the gallery. Nice job, Ned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ned.
You're welcome. We did it. Well, I think everybody's going to socialize at 6, I guess.
I think so. I do have one tech question for you.
What's that?
For the anti-racism journey group, is it